Welcome back to Pine Tree State Restorations and the Welch Super Clock. I'm just kidding. So anyway, if you watch my previous videos on this Welch, customer brought this in. It's been in the family forever because this is an 1850s clock. And if you go back to the original first video, you'll see the history of this clock. It's quite colorful on Welch there. But it's about an 1848, 1850s gravity clock, and how that works is, now give me a flashlight here so you guys can see, there's weights inside the clock. It goes up to a pulley at the top, right here, and on this one here, you can see there's a little pulley right there. Now that pulley setup right there is for the gong. I'll run that for you real quick. And the other side, see the weight, that doesn't have an idler pulley in the middle. It just has one right here. So for starters, there's a pin on all these pulleys, and they were rusty. And the only way you can get them out, really, is if you pull this pin out, take the back of this case out, and this case is so fragile, ain't no way I'm going to do that. So what I did is I put oil on that pin, and I run it with my hand, and then I put a rubber piece on my drill, and I oiled it, and I took the slack out, took the weights off, and I spun that at high speed, polished those, and I blew that out. Used synthetic oil right here. After I ran that drill over these and spun them, I put more oil in there and blew that out with air. So now it's nice and clean. Same way with this one down here. That one there was locked up as well. Another thing that's weird about this clock is the way the motor sits in. There's a top piece right here that holds it on one side. And then there's these little U-bolts. You can see them right in there. Okay, let's see if I can see them. They're right there. Okay, come over here. You can see them. They're right there. Now what that does is that allows that clock motor to tilt in and out like this. There's play in there. And you don't want it pushed all the way in or pushed all the way out. You got to find a happy medium. Don't ask me why they did this. So that if you're running the clock, you'll look and see that the pendulum arm is perpendicular to the case. So that's very important. That was way off, and that all the bolts were loose, screws were loose, and that was way off, and the pulleys were froze up. And one of the major problems with it was someone carried the clock several times with the pendulum on the clock. You can't do that. If you carry the clock with the pendulum on the clock, that's solid brass. It's very heavy. You'll bend the rocker arm, and you'll bend the pendulum arm. And once you do all that, none of this will work. See how this works? That has to be perfectly lined up so that when that rocker, when it runs, it catches that gear, goes in one and out the other, and it has to be perfectly lined up. This was bent. Okay, so we got that all. You got to fiddle around with it for quite a while until you get it just right. And once it's right, you're good. The clock motor, I washed it down first with WD-40, blew it off. Then I used pure alcohol, blew it off. And then I used pure synthetic 10-weight oil, blew it off. And then I wiped down as much as I could the clock motor. And of course, I oiled all the pulleys. All right. Now the case is in really, it's old. It's an 1850s clock. The case is really fragile. You got to handle it with eggs. When you carry this clock, you want to carry it with a slight angle backwards, so the weights don't bounce around when you're carrying the clock. And you, of course, always want to take the pendulum off. It just hooks on there. It comes right off. And when you set this clock up, this clock is a mantle clock. It's, believe it or not, it's not a wall hanging clock. It's a mantle clock. You can hang it on the wall, but it's supposed to sit on a shelf or sit on a, some kind of shelf. But it's a shelf clock. It doesn't have a hole in the back to hang it. You got to put it on a little shelf. It's a shelf clock, mantle clock. Another thing that was wrong with the clock was the hinges were froze up on the door. Okay, I put some of that synthetic oil on those and worked those and got those loose again. And then you'll notice that the door here, well, all the paint in the center was flaking off. That stuff's just like chalk now. It's so old. So what I did is I took a razor blade and squared that hole up. Then I touched up all them, see them darker black spots with black paint. When that dries, I'm going to clean that glass carefully on the inside, and I'm going to dust it on the inside with some clear coat to keep that from crumbling, because you just touch it and it crumbles. It just crumbles. I mean, literally, it's that fragile. Turn it around here. See what it looks like now. That's what it looks like now. And when I put it on, you'll be able to see originally it was completely filled in. But over time, it just literally crumbled right out of there. But the customer wants to keep as much of the originality as possible. So that was the only way I could do it. So I took a razor blade, squared those edges up, and then I painted all the missing black. And I'm telling you, stuff's just like powder. You just touch it, it'll come right off. And we're going to clear coat that on the back so it won't fall apart anymore. And then that'll go back on there. And it'll be kind of cool because the pendulum will still be down in the hole. And you'll be able to see the improved 30-hour brass clock emblem. I am going to dust that lightly, very lightly, with some clear coat too, because I don't want the original sticker to go away. It's fragile as well. I'd like to keep that as long as humanly possible. What was wrong with the gong was the clock motor was loose and the gong was loose and this hammer was slightly out of alignment. Sounds a lot better now. So if you got the clock is loose and the hammer starts striking, it's going to make this gong and rattle sound. It's going to sound terrible. So I didn't, if you want to take, it's impossible to take the back of this clock off, because if you did, it would probably crumble. On the back, it's multiple pieces put together, and I'm going to have to coat that with tung oil. And the reason why I want to do that is the clock case is so horribly dry. I want to get some tung oil on that wood and preserve it. Same way with the outside of the case and the frame. So I'm going to take a small brush and I'm going to be brushing that and wiping it off after I get the clock all back together. But I wanted to show you how this worked. And there's the original key right there. There's some extra keys in the bottom that don't fit this. It's kind of a bonus. I wanted to show you how this worked and what goes on with these old clocks. They're pretty simple to fix. I'll tell you why. This is a gravity clock and they're pretty forgiving. They're brass gears, brass frame, heavy weights. They can be not quite right and still run. So once you get this back together, how you adjust the time is that pendulum has a screw on the bottom of it. If it's running too slow, you got to move the pendulum up. If it's running too fast, move the pendulum down, and that'll slow it down until you get just right. Now, how you want to do that is that every 24 hours, you want the clock to be a tiny bit behind, a minute or two behind. That way, when you wind the clock after 24 hours, you can move the minute hand to the exact time. If it's too far forward at the end of that time, then you're going to have to wait. You don't want to move the needle backwards because it'll slip on the shaft. So it's best to have it run a hair slow than a hair fast. Okay? But there it is. The E.N. Welch, made in Connecticut. Quite the colorful history on this company. And we're going to put I didn't put the face on. The face is right there. because if I did, you wouldn't be able to see what I did to the clock. So this is the Ian Welch. It's been a fun one. She's in pretty bad shape. She sat for a long, long time. But it's been running for 15 hours, 12, 15 hours now. Hasn't missed a beat. Running like a timepiece. Just runs like a clock, pardon the pun. But this is Ian Welch, and this is Pine Tree State Restorations. And when we get this clock completely back together, I might do a YouTube short on it with everything all back in one piece again, the face back on and the door back on, just so you guys can see it. But thanks for watching Pine Tree State Restorations, and we will see you soon.